Hey, everybody. I thought that I would pop over and introduce you to one of the worksheets that we use in the genderfck group coaching program. So, as part of the 10-week group coaching program that is genderfck, every week people in the program get a packet of worksheets that go along with that week's content. So, this is in the week that is under our pillar of possibility. It's about creating more space for yourself in your life. It's about imagining more for yourself in your life. The reason I like focusing on this is that research shows that folks from marginalized identities tend to imagine less for themselves. That means that they imagine that less is possible. They imagine that they have the opportunity for less satisfaction in their life, for less pleasure, for less fulfillment. They don't think that those things are possible. And so they tend to reach for less. And that is the pattern that I want to disrupt here. I want to also take into account that there are very, very real reasons that marginalized folks imagine less for themselves. Folks who are watching this will probably have a lot of overlapping, intersecting, marginalized identities, whether that is gender or sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, racial identity, religious identity, differences of abilities. There are lots of reasons and very real structural things that get in the way of people imagining more for themselves and get in the way of people being able to have more for themselves. So I want to name that, and I want to take into account that those things are not made up in our heads. Those are very real. And there are a lot of things that we don't imagine for ourselves that are based on some limiting beliefs, that are based on assumptions about what is possible, about what we can do, that aren't always 100% accurate. And those are the things that I really want to try to pinpoint here. I ask a lot of my clients and myself this magic question, this question of, what would you do if you weren't afraid? It's a question that has really, really been transformative in my life. And I have seen it be incredibly transformative for a lot of my clients in their lives as well. And what this question does is it really points to an area of our life that we don't often consider. We spend a lot of time thinking about all the things that we're afraid of. We spend a lot of time thinking about all of our anxieties, but we don't often spend a lot of time thinking about what are the possibilities if fear was not a factor. Now, asking yourself that question doesn't mean that you immediately run off and do all the things that you're afraid of, or that those things don't have very real consequences in the world that we live in. But this is an exercise in saying, well, if I could do anything, if I could have the things that I want, if I could feel the way that I want to feel in my life, what would that look like? And often, even asking ourselves those questions opens up new possibilities that we hadn't even considered before. So I want to invite all of you watching this video to ask yourself this question. Ask yourself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? If those limits were not there for you? And then I want you to think about that for each of these areas of your life. So genderfuck is based on 3 pillars. As you can see, they are play, pleasure, and possibility. So when you're thinking about play, we're thinking about things in the category of gender identity and expression, creativity, learning, hobbies, self-expression, space, and play. So what I mean by space and place are travel. What about your home? Where do you live? What does your home look like? How is it decorated? What sort of vibe do you have in your room and your home? What are the spaces that you want to be in, both in community and personally? When we think about pleasure, we're thinking about a few different things. So first of all is solo pleasure. How do we experience pleasure in our own bodies? And that includes both solo sex or masturbation, but it also includes things like mindfulness, being able to be present, things that really feed your soul. You know what I'm talking about. Music, art, movies, books that you love. Would you have more of those things in your life? What would they look like? It's also talking about partnered pleasure. This is about intimate relationships of all kinds. So, not just romantic and sexual relationships, but friendships, chosen family. Who are the people that you want in your life? And what would those relationships look like if you weren't afraid? It's also talking about emotional and physical health. So, what would your relationship be to food, to rest, to moving your body? What would your mental health look like? What sorts of help would you get for your mental health? What would healing look like? What would it feel like to be healed? For example, when I ask myself about pleasure, I often start thinking about how I often don't feel safe in the world, especially when it comes to money. It's one of the things growing up in a family that didn't really have a lot of money at all. It's very hard for me to feel settled and safe in that department. And so when I ask myself things around what would I do if I weren't afraid, things around a scarcity mentality come into my life. So that's just one example. Another thing might be my own mental health. What might I do if I wasn't afraid? Maybe I would seek out trauma treatment in a new way if I wasn't afraid to look at some of those things in my life that were scary to me. So those are some examples of what that might look like. And then we get down to possibility. So this is talking about kinship, right? Those chosen family relationships that I was talking about. It's friendships, other non-romantic relationships in your life. But it's also about community. It's about pride and your identity and your expression of yourself and who you are. It's about meaning. It's about taking up space. What sort of space would you take up if you were not afraid? What sort of space would you take up if you were not afraid of losing other connections in your life? It's thinking about meaning. What kind of things would feel really good to you and meaningful to you as you move forward in your life? Is it volunteering at your local pet shelter? Is it helping younger trans or non-binary folks in some sort of youth center? Whatever, maybe it's building houses. It doesn't matter what it is, but what is the thing that brings you meaning that maybe has been a small part of your life that you would like it to be a bigger part of your life? And here's a key question there. Who do you need to be in order to have the meaning in your life and to be able to give yourself in the way that you want to others, to the world? So I'm going to leave you there with this question of what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I want to ask you to do one thing for me. I want you to look at the things that you've written down. I encourage you to write it down. And I want you to look at them. And I want you to find one thing, just one tiny thing that you can do to move closer to one of these things that you've listed. And I want you to try it out and see what it's like, and then notice how you feel. And that might be a catalyst for you to do some more things that are on this list, or at least ask yourself some good questions around why is it that I don't think that these things are possible? Why is it that I'm afraid of these things? And sometimes, like I said, there are very real consequences in the world that we live in that we cannot ignore. And we can't do some of these things on the list because of our own safety. And that's real. And maybe there's some that you can. Maybe there are some ways that you've limited yourself that you haven't really realized. if you're wanting to create more space for yourself and your gender identity and expression, I encourage you to check out genderfck.club. That's genderfuck with no U in fuck because we are polite. Genderfck.club. I'll make sure that that link is below this video, wherever it is posted. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you all later.